Okay, hi, bro. I think you can go ahead, please.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a start. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Haibo Chen at Institute for Transport Studies of University of Leeds, which is the Work Package 5 leader responsible for updating the FOT methodology and organizing webinars and workshops in this project. And today's webinar is the first one, and will be delivered by my colleague, Professor Oliver Caston, who has been involved in many FOTs and previous FOT-Net support actions. Oliver was instrumental in proposing the FOT methodology and developing the FOT Handbook. Before that, I thought that it might help if I give you a quick run-through of the basic information of this project, such as its objectives and the main activities. Above all, it may give you some information about how and when you may be involved and what you would expect from the project. As you can see on the screen, this FOT-Net Data project is a continuation of FOT-Net activity with a special focus on data sharing and data reuse support. The main objectives of this 3-year support action project are to support efficient sharing and reuse of FOT datasets collected in the previous projects, develop and promote a framework for sharing data, build a detailed catalog of the available data and tools, and operate an international networking platform for FOT activities with a global collaboration. And to achieve this, the project is structured in 6 work packages, as you can see on the screen. On the lower side, right side, you can also see some information about the duration of the project, its budget and project partners, and so on. Work Package 5 aims to enhance and update the FOT methodology with new information about how data can be shared and reused, transfer knowledge of the FOT methodology, and provide hands-on experiences of data usage. This slide gives you an overview of 6 webinars, especially designed for participants who are relatively new to FOTs or who want to become familiar with FOT methodology. Each webinar, as you can see in the table, will target a part of the methodology. As I said earlier, today, Oliver will present the first topic. The same time next Wednesday, the 19th, Yvonne will, from article, will deliver the second webinar, and a week after, on the 26th, the third topic will be presented by Helena at SAFER. All the materials and presentations from the webinars will be used to create e-learning modules which will be uploaded to the project website and made available for self-study. And as you can see that there are 3 more webinars to be organized in the new year. Details in terms of the date and time will be available later. So finally, you can find more information and cooperation opportunities from the project website, or if you like, email us with your specific questions. Thank you very much for your participation today, and I hope you attend other webinars later. So now I'm passing the screen on to Oliver.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Oliver Carsten, as Hybo said. I've worked on quite a number of real-world trials of driving assistance systems. And as Hybo also said, I was one of the authors of the FOT Handbook, which I'm going to explain a little bit about in a moment. Just in terms of etiquette of this, if you don't understand something, by all means put up a question, but it's probably easier if questions can be left over to the end. There'll be plenty of time after my slides, I hope, for you to ask me questions. And the process for asking questions is to use the chat box, which you should see towards the bottom side of your panel. So you can type a message there, and then I'll read out the message. If just in case you can send it to me, you can send it to everybody. I'll read it out and endeavor to give an answer. So let me start. Okay, you should see my my screen now. What I'm talking about is how one starts out a systematic study, and that's what a field operational test is. It's an attempt at applying scientific methodology to an investigation in the real world, which is not always that easy to do because one gets messed around in the real world in a way one doesn't in a laboratory. I was actually at a meeting yesterday where people were discussing doing controlled randomized trials in road safety. And that's all very well to do in theory, but in practice it's extremely difficult to do because the people can't be controlled in the way that laboratory rats can, or one can control a medical experiment. One can't control where people drive because one doesn't want to, one can't control the weather situation, etc., etc. So there's always confounding variables. But what we attempted to do in the FOT Handbook was to try and create a process that would enable the best quality study to be done, obviously within resource constraints, and to establish a process to ensure that at each step the people conducting the study do a careful consideration of what needs to be done and of the future implications of what they're doing. Now, that doesn't mean that the FOT Handbook is a Bible and can just be interpreted literally, that if it says something on the page that can be applied in all situations. Maybe you've got a situation where you need to adapt it. Maybe when we were writing it, we didn't think about some peculiar oddity of some kind of system or whatever. So it needs to be used in an intelligent way, not just followed willy-nilly. Okay, so the FOT Handbook, that's where you can find it. It's available online on the FOT-Net website, and the current version is version 5. So it went through a very substantial revision process about 18 months ago, in which it was updated to take care of particularly of new kinds of real-world studies, such as naturalistic driving studies and studies of cooperative systems. Naturalistic studies are studies where you're not implementing any system at all, you're just observing how people are driving and trying to learn from that. Examples being the large-scale SHARP2 studies in the US, or the current UDrive project in the EU. Cooperative systems involve some kind of vehicle-to-vehicle or infrastructure-to-vehicle communication. They're quite futuristic at the moment. There are not really many cooperative systems being deployed, but certainly various public authorities the European Commission and so on are looking very systematically at whether there is large potential in the future to make gains in safety, the environment, traffic efficiency and so on from the use of cooperative systems. So this is the FESTA-V. This is the sort of diagram that's behind the whole of the FESTA Handbook that lays out a sort of continuum where you start at the top left of the diagram with deciding which systems you're going to test, which functions you're going to test, what the technology trials will be. Obviously, in the case of a naturalistic driving study, as I said, you're not doing that. And all the way at the right, you have the scaling up and the socio-economic cost-benefit analysis. You're looking to see whether what will happen when the system is deployed on a very large scale. You're also trying to futurecast, to imagine what might happen as it's rolled out over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and then you're trying to do a cost-benefit analysis to look at whether for society as a whole the benefits outweigh the costs, because clearly if they don't, then at the end of your study you're concluding that the system is too expensive to be really worth deploying. So today's focus is on the first 3 boxes at the top left-hand side. Well, actually the first 4 boxes, because I'm including context. I'm going to explain what we mean by context. So we're talking here about the situation in which we do the study, that's the context, the description of the actual functions we're going to be testing, then the situations in which we're going to be testing those functions, and finally the research questions and hypotheses that we want to address in our study. So context, first of all, that could just be the problem area being addressed. Is the system primarily targeted, let's say, at environmental effects? It might be a green driving support system, or is it targeted at safety effects? And of course a lot of FOTs have been addressed towards safety problems because of the feeling among the policymakers and the system suppliers that those are the primary focus of a lot of these technologies. But it also might be the policy objective of the study. If you think, for example, that the politicians are telling you that your system should be focused on dealing with driver fatigue, or dealing with driver distraction, or improving the efficiency of the vehicles on the road by 10%, then of course that provides the background context for the study that you're carrying out. And although you might look at side effects, you clearly, the funders might have a big influence on what the primary focus of the study is, and they might have a very strong interest, of course, in the final question on the top right about whether the system will deliver, how much it will deliver on the problem area that you're focusing on. So, functions. This gets a bit more complicated. In FESTA, first of all, we talk about functions rather than systems, because systems are technologies, functions are the aids or whatever that those technologies provide to the, let's say, to the driver or to other road users. So you might have a collision warning, but the collision warning could be given by various kinds of systems. It might have a radar on the front, it might have image processing, it might have some combination of those, it might be linked to an adaptive cruise control, an intelligent car following system, or it might not. We prefer to talk about the function because that's how the user perceives it. The user is probably not that interested in the technology behind it. So in terms of functions, we might have autonomous functions. These are ones which basically are fitted to the vehicle and only rely on the systems, the technologies in that single vehicle. So autonomous emergency braking could be a system that we might currently focus on, because a lot of people are saying, well, this could be the most wonderful thing since sliced bread in terms of safety, but we don't really know at the moment. First of all, we don't know enough about which kinds of crashes it really addresses. We don't know what proportion of events or crashes it really addresses, and we don't know how users adapt to that system. Do they drive more dangerously because they think the system will avoid crashes? That was argued, for example, about anti-lock braking systems in the past, although now we solidly believe that those bring benefit. So you might have some questions about that. So that would be an example of an autonomous system. If we combine that on a set of vehicles with forward collision warning, which might, so the automatic emergency braking is designed to intervene very late, we might add to that a warning function to warn the drivers earlier and hoping that they react before the AEB does. Then we've got AEB combined with FCW. Well, there we might want to know what the single effect of AEB is. We might want to know what the single effect of an FCW is, and then we also might want to know what the combined effect of the two is and how they interact with each other. So we might want to think about an experimental design in which some of the people start with AEB and then end up with the combination, and other people start with FCW and end up with the combination. Or we might think of, look systematically at everybody having all the stages. So we might actually vary the order systematically. We might have some people starting with AEB, some people starting with FCW, and some people even starting with the combination and then removing. You need to think about that. You need to think about how we would establish the single system effect and the combination effect. And of course the combination effect might not necessarily be the sum of the two systems. It's rather unlikely that it would. We'd get some additive effect of the combination. We might even get some interaction. People's experience of FCW might color how they behave when they're driving with AEB and so on. And then we might have, as I've been talked about earlier, we could have cooperative systems. We might have some sort of communication from the infrastructure to the vehicle. That demands some sort of roadside transmitters. And then we get lots of extra system complexity because we've got systems on board the vehicle, we've got roadside transmitters, we need to make sure that the messages are received in the vehicle, we need to make sure that they're reliable, etc., etc. And one of the problems with cooperative systems, because they're not deployed in very large numbers, and if you conduct an FOT, it's very unlikely that you would have large numbers of drivers with cooperative systems in a single place. It could be quite hard to carry out a naturalistic FOT in which we just let people drive anywhere and hope that the system will then operate as and when needed. We might need, with a cooperative system, let's say we were interested in how cooperative systems could support intersection safety. We might want to look at a particular intersection and equip it. We haven't got many intersections equipped. And then we might want to make sure that our drivers actually drive through that intersection on a particular day so they actually encounter the messages about the other vehicles being in their area. They get information if they're merging from the side road about a vehicle being too close to them on the main road, and so on. And if we don't do those control trials, we might never be able to observe the effect of the system at all. So we need to think about that. We've got, because of that added complexity, because of the problems of large-scale deployment, of reaching a kind of high level in the real world of deployment, we might need to sort of nudge things along to make sure that people actually experience the effect of the system, and therefore we can make some observations about how it might pan out when it's used more widely. So Now on to research questions. These typically address the big stakeholder issues. Is it good for safety? Does it benefit the environment? What's the effect on mobility of having it? Obviously, if I've got a traveler information system or a navigation system, I might actually travel more because I now know how to get to places that I didn't know how to get to before. What's the effect on traffic efficiency, on the my journey time, on the network flow, on the network capacity, and so on. And around each of those questions, then we can generate sub-research questions. So on safety, we could say, well, what's the effect on intersection safety? What's the effect on the probability of having a single vehicle crash? What's the effect on loss of control crashes? What's the effect on interaction with motorcyclists or with cyclists or with pedestrians and so on? And one can go on with sub-research questions, sub-research questions and so on. And I'm not going to bore you with that process. I think it's rather obvious, but you really need to do this quite systematically, and you also need to be aware that it's very easy to generate dozens, if not hundreds, of research questions. And then, of course, the issue arises, can you afford to be asking all those research questions and be generating hypotheses around all those research questions within the scale of funding that you've got and within the size of study that you've got? And if you can't, then you need to think about ways to prioritize your research questions for deciding but in the team, and obviously perhaps with the funders as well, which are the most important research questions, which are the ones that you can't afford to sacrifice, you really have to focus on. So other research questions are, how often do people actually use the systems? Just because they've got it on the vehicle doesn't mean they actually use it. Many of these systems can be switched off. Are you going to enable users to switch it off? In which case, if they don't really like the system in the first place, they may only be using it a very small proportion of the time. But that, of course, will be really important for when you scale up, because if people only use the system for 20% of their driving, or they only use it on motorways and not in cities, then it can't have an effect in the places where they choose not to use it, or at the times when they choose not to use it. And behind that is, of course, their acceptance of the system. If they don't like the functionality of the system, or they think it's has too great an impact on the way that they drive naturally or whatever, they get annoyed by it, then again, they may not use it, or they may use it less and less over the trial. So you need to be monitoring acceptance. Perhaps week by week, month by month, as the trial proceeds. So now I'm going to go in a little bit of detail into how one can generate research questions, and from those research questions, hypotheses about effects. So the top-down approach, particularly focusing now on hypotheses, deals with these 6 areas, and I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to later on come round to a bottom-up approach. The top-down approach is a systematic way, again, of identifying a set of issues around a particular system. So the top-down approach is focused particularly on how users behave with systems. It's not just about safety aspects, it could be compliance with advice of any kind. And it is based on some literature around what then used to be called trials, real-world trials, but now we've called field operational tests, that goes back to 1998. Indeed, it goes back further than that. So we could have the direct effects of a system on the users and driving. I mean, obviously, the direct effect of an automatic emergency braking system would be to brake in the in the event that a very severe incident is encountered that the system thinks the user isn't responding to. So it might be a rear-end collision that's just about to happen in milliseconds, or a pedestrian stepping out into the road that the system notices that the driver isn't responding to. In the case of a warning system, it would obviously be the direct effect would be drivers' immediate response to that warning system. So it might be, we could relate it to, for example, the HMI, the human-machine interface. If the buzz or the vibration or whatever it is, or the flash from the warning system isn't loud enough for the users to hear, or isn't bright enough for the users to see, or doesn't vibrate enough for the users to feel, then it will have no effect. So we obviously need to make sure that people can perceive it, and whatever, that the threshold is right, that it's not that systems aren't masked by radios, in-car entertainment systems, etc., that people can see the screen, that the screen is understandable, etc., because otherwise we won't have that direct effect. And similarly, one could have that same discussion around a roadside system. Indirect effects are how users respond when they have it. Do they learn to behave in a particular way? Do they drive in a particular way to avoid the system causing them, the system triggering an alarm? That's obviously what we're hoping. But sometimes we might have negative behavioral adaptation. We might have people driving faster because they think they can rely on the system to warn them in the event. We might, one side effect of a collision warning system could be that drivers might engage in more distraction activities. They might pay less attention, hoping that when they need to pay attention, the system will warn them. So we need, obviously, to be looking quite systematically at these wider behavioral issues and thinking about ways in which we can observe them. Then we might get non-users following us. We might get, let's say I have I'm driving closer to the vehicle in front. Maybe other users will drive closer to the vehicle in front. Maybe I've got a lane change assistance system, other people follow the behavior. Maybe I'm advised to drive on a particular route, and people suddenly notice that all the traffic is leaving the motorway, and they follow those vehicles. I mean, you might get that if you see, for example, a roadside warning system warning you of an event. Even without a navigation, you might think, well, that person seems to know where to go, I'll follow that person. Then, of course, we might get effects on how I behave towards vulnerable road users. Does the warning system that warns me about pedestrians or intervenes, does it make me more or less likely to be kind to pedestrians? If I get messages on my screen when I'm approaching a zebra crossing, does that lead me to not to pay attention to the pedestrian who's waiting at that pedestrian crossing? So obviously vulnerable road users may not be equipped with a technology, but they could be affected by drivers' use of the technology. And that, of course, we should also remember that that can apply as well to motorcycle riders. We should include them. They may often not have the kind of system we're talking about. Let's say we have some sort of a blind spot warning system. Are we sure that motorcyclists who are filtering through the traffic are detected by that blind spot warning system or the lane change assistance system? Modifying accident consequences, that relates particularly to systems such as eCall, and the system that's now being deployed across the EU, which is designed to not to avoid crashes, but to make crashes less lethal by getting the emergency services there as quickly as possible. So we're talking about here about technologies that would improve rescue after a crash has happened, maybe by notifying the authorities of a crash automatically as eCall does, perhaps by improving the ability of an ambulance to get to the location of an accident, maybe even in the future by giving information about the kinds of injuries people have suffered and so on. And as I've mentioned earlier, particularly talking about when we're talking about the research question area, we have to think quite specifically about how one system working with another could be treated by the user. Users may not treat a combination of systems as being similar to those systems on their own. I mean, indeed, that's obviously the purpose of combining systems, but sometimes one may get unanticipated effects of those combinations, and we need to learn about those. Now, this is quite a famous model of the how the driving task can be parceled up, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we need to think about effects of systems, effects of functions at each level of the driving task. So the strategic level is all about, do I travel today by car, and if I travel today by car as opposed to traveling by bus or by rail or by bicycle, which route do I choose? So it's about my plans in driving, and obviously my plans in driving could be reformulated while I drive. I might notice that the traffic on my normal route to work is really dense, or I might hear on the radio about an incident, so then I might reroute. And obviously some systems, particularly navigation systems, various kinds of traveler information systems are designed to give people strategic information. Then the next level down is about the maneuvering level. It's about things like lane changes, how I behave, give way at a junction, and so on. So there we're talking about, if we're talking about support systems, we're talking about blind spot information systems, or whatever. But if I have a navigation system that suddenly tells me to exit from the motorway at the strategic level, then that might, if I'm told only a few hundred meters before the exit that I need to take the exit, I might make a very sudden lane change. I might even make the lane change without really thinking about it and have a some sort of conflict with a vehicle in the next lane over. And at the control level, we're talking about the more automated levels of driving. We're talking about steering, longitudinal control, my braking, my acceleration, my gear changing, how I steer around a curve, and so on. And clearly quite a few driver support systems, such as adaptive cruise control, are designed to help me in the lane departure warning, designed to help the driver in dealing with that automated level, control level of driving. Intelligent speed assistance, which or various kinds of speed information systems would be another one that would have an impact on, or we hope would have an impact on the control level of driving. So we need to look at our system, go through the strategic level, the tactical level, the maneuvering level in other words, and the control level, and think, can we identify any hypotheses about how driving or road use could be affected as I start to use a function to help me in my road use, in my driving. So at the strategic level, we're talking about things like, as I said, modifying mode choice. We might have a traveler information system that tells me about park and ride, modifying route choice, which would be an obvious effect of navigation systems, but now could be built into some of the more advanced, let's say, eco-routing systems. It might tell me that I might save fuel by going in, adopting a particular route or by changing my route. And it might modify my exposure. Maybe because I've got the traveler information system, I'm more willing to drive by car to strange places on a Saturday night that I didn't go to in the past, Maybe because I now know about the park and ride, I'm actually more willing to use public transport, so it can work both ways. Tactical effects could be include, I've put speed choice both at tactical and a control level because it can obviously affect that. Speed choice can influence, for example, how I behave at an intersection. The speed of main road traffic has a big effect on incidents at intersections and the possibility of a injury or a serious injury or even a fatality, and of course will also affect my control level. So at the control level we'll be looking at things like the possibility of a loss of control accident, a skid on wet roads or whatever. And in driving tasks we can think about vehicle control, we can think about how we're tracking the road, we can think about collision avoidance, in other words maintaining a safe envelope around the vehicle. We can think about the driver making sure that they're carrying on, monitoring their speed. We can think about rule compliance, not violating rules of traffic rules such as not going through red lights, obeying warnings, obeying the rules of intersections and so on, not violating rights of way, and we can think about navigation. So these are all things I think I've mentioned already. And it's quite useful to set up some kind of checklist to make sure that you have gone through all these issues. And then we need to think about the road user, him or herself. What's their experience? How long have they been driving? How long have they held a license? How much do they drive per year? Are they used to driving in these particular conditions? What are their attitudes? What are their attitudes about driving? Are they somebody who generally obeys the speed limits and reports that? Are they a sensation-seeking driver that takes high risks? Are they an elderly driver that tries to drive very calmly? And so on. And in terms of effects of the systems, we obviously want to carry on the study quite long so we can look at how effects change over time. We might be interested in the short-term issues. We might be interested in learning issues, how long it takes people to learn to use a particular function. But clearly, if after a while they decide, as I said, not to use the particular function, if they decide to turn it off, then it's very important to study that. If they start to behave differently after a couple of months of driving with a particular function, then we need to learn that as well. So we need to think about how long we need to carry on our study. Ideally, we might like to carry it on for years, but that's not normally possible. Do people ever reach a kind of plateau of behavior? Well, I think there's quite a lot of work on long-term adaptation, long-term learning effects that indicates that people don't necessarily reach a total plateau. They continue to change their behavior as they grow more familiar with a function or with a system. And also mentioned earlier, we have intended and unintended effects of a particular system. Unintended effects might be people do say this, that when you have a vehicle with a lane departure warning system, they might think that that's quite a good fatigue driver support system. So they might drive more late at night, hoping that the system will warn them if they start to wander off the road because they're nodding off from getting half falling asleep or whatever. Whoops. So again, back to the checklist kind of issues: safety, efficiency, environment, mobility, acceptance and trust, extent of usage, how long it takes people to adopt the system. That's a kind of a learning issue. You want it to be embedded in their behavior, so they're no longer thinking about how they have to use it. They're no longer thinking about it in handbook mode. They've got used to it. And we might want to think about how effects might change at different levels of penetration. Again, something I talked about with cooperative systems, but something that's not that easy to manipulate with some other systems. Can we is there some way in which people's usage of a system would change when lots of people have it versus only a few people have it? Is there some early adopter advantage? That's the case with some kinds of technologies, but not the case with other kinds of technologies. So the bottom-up approach, and we're sort of getting to the point where you'll be answer questions. I'm nearing the end of my presentation. The bottom-up approach makes use of, that's the sort of tautology of use cases, and I'm just going to define those. So a use case is defined by the FOT Handbook as a specific event in which a system is expected to behave according to a specified function. So in the case of a forward collision warning system, it would be the vehicle in front suddenly decelerating. That's when the system would be designed to give you a warning. Or it might be the case that you accelerate too much towards the vehicle in front, and then that triggers a warning from the system. In the case of automated emergency braking, again, it might be the vehicle in front suddenly decelerating, or it might be the pedestrian stepping out, because now we've got a pedestrian safety system that intervenes when a pedestrian is detected, when the system believes that you're about to collide with the pedestrian, and unless the emergency braking is applied, that collision will take place come what may. So that's the use case. We might have use cases for which the system is designed, and we might have the use cases for which the system is not designed. So is the forward collision warning triggered, or is it not triggered when I hit the back of a stationary queue? Some early designs might only have dealt with moving situations. Can the ACC handle stop-and-go situations in which the traffic gets very slow? Earlier, the early standards for ACCs, the international standards, said that they couldn't be turned on below a particular highway speed. So we need to think about whether people understand that functionality. And then we have the definition of a situation. One specific level or combination of specific levels of situational variables. So here we might be talking about traffic conditions or weather conditions. So does my system operate when it's raining? Maybe because of the design of the radar or the image processing or whatever, it doesn't work in rain or in fog, or it's unreliable in very cold weather. We need to know about that. So maybe there are some situations where the system isn't triggered. And the scenario is that use case in a particular situation. So it is the forward collision warning in rain, in heavy traffic, or whatever it happens to be. It's the situation combined with the use case. So we can now go through dozens and dozens of use cases and think about the hypotheses that we can generate around those use cases. Obviously, there's not much point thinking about use cases that are very, very unlikely, but of course we do have to figure out how we're going to detect those situations. If we can't detect the situations, then we won't be able to observe the scenarios. So do we implement some kind of weather observation, weather gathering data in our trial? Do we figure out how to observe when it's raining, how to observe when the road is wet, etc., etc. And performance indicators is what the next seminar is going to be about. That's the one coming next week from Yvonne. But I'm just mentioning that once you've established your hypotheses, particularly, then you can start to think about how you're going to measure those hypotheses. And then you need to think about both objective, that's ones may be collected automatically by your data acquisition system, and subjective ones, which are the user feelings about the system, and so on. So now we're open to questions, so please feel free to fire away at me.
Oliver, I've seen there was a question on whether the webinar would be recorded.
I didn't get that question, but the answer is the webinar is being recorded. Yes, you'll be able to play it back.
And it will be available on the FOT-Net Data website, if you can, to tell the people.
Okay.
Okay. So can you check the question section?
I need to...
Yeah, you have to click the questions.
It's on my screen. It says, is anybody typing a question? Because I'm not seeing any.
Neither do I.
My panel only shows send chat to organizers only, but I assume that's organizers and panelists only. Hi Bo, ask me a question and then we can see it's working.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I'm in a panelist, so I don't know whether other people can hear me.
I can hear you.
Yeah, that is probably why Maria asked you to pass a message on to the other people, because now you, as a speaker, perhaps you are the only one on the panel who can talk to other people. Is that right or not?
In the chat, I don't know.
No, I think we can all chat.
Okay.
So if people have questions, can you please recopy them now in the chat session? Ask your question in the chat session. There may have gone something wrong. So could you please copy it now and or put your question in the chat session. So we're looking for questions now. Well, if the only question then is yes.
Well, can I ask a question then? And then Oliver can just repeat my question to other people if other people can't hear me.
I think everybody can hear you.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Well, you're talking about how people's behavior might be changed by advanced devices on board. I think that's really, really important because personally, I had a experience with this kind of thing. You know, the many vehicles have this rear cameras installed. When they do the reverse, then if there's something behind it, the camera beeps. I was in the car park and somebody reversed out of his slot and hit my vehicle with a very awkward angle. And the first sentence when he came out to talk to me, which wasn't nice, anyway, was that, oh, my rear camera didn't beep.
Yep.
You know, so people long ago we didn't have all these fancy devices, but now we have. So would that be a typical problem you have been studying?
Well, absolutely. I mean, over-reliance on a system and the way people start to change their behavior, one can hypothesize that this person actually was probably reversing, looking to the front without turning their head to look to the rear to see what was behind them, because they thought, well, my warning, the beep, will take care of the problem, the parking assistance system or whatever it is. Similarly, one might, I've heard people say that they have problems after using such a reversing aid when they switch to a car that doesn't have it, because the systems, they suddenly don't get the beeps, and then they actually run into the vehicle behind them because they're so used to the aid of the system that they've grown to completely rely on it and completely expect it. So in your research, in your experimental design, you might want to think about having the system on for a while and then switching it off so that you can actually look at those kind of carryover effects.
Yeah, that's a good point. Can I just follow this one a little bit further?
Yes, of course.
The study, many studies showed that some safety measurements soon after they were introduced, and the data show that people have a very bizarre behavior. For example, you know, the car seatbelt was introduced, and a study reviewed that there's a certain speeding up behavior, and when the bike helmet was introduced, and parents just told the children put the helmet on, assuming that they are fine. And actually, there's more accident afterwards. So what have your research found? Was the similar kind of devices or purposes?
Okay. Well, I think whether I think some of those cases are not proven. I mean, it was argued that drivers with seatbelts would be taking more risks because of the seatbelts. It was similarly, the same was argued with ABS. In some cases, there were some observed adaptation effects, in some cases not. I think actually when people wear motorcycle helmets and bicycle helmets, the problem is actually more that, not that they take more risk when they've got the helmets on, but they actually don't wear the helmets properly. So you actually need to make sure that they actually connect the strap. You can see all over East Asia, you can see people driving around wearing motorcycle helmets, but they haven't got the chin strap done up. So when if there's a crash, the helmet just flies off. But of course, we do need to understand all those more subtle effects. I mean, personally, I'm not a believer in the sort of what's called the theory of risk homeostasis, that people use up all the safety benefit of a system by taking increased risks in other ways, because, I mean, for one thing, people don't even know all the safety benefits of a system. They can't possibly know how to even the situation out. They don't know how much a helmet protects them from injuries, and therefore how much faster they can afford to go now that they've got the helmet on.
Indeed.
But we need, yes, we absolutely need to study those subtle effects. And I was arguing, for example, as I made the presentation, that with one of the systems that's now being promoted quite widely and installed quite widely, which is automated emergency braking, but we don't really understand how users adapt their driving once they have this technology on board. So we can sort of do a calculation based on, if you like, the change in energy in a crash of a given type with and without AEB, but that doesn't necessarily tell us what the network-wide effect of AEB might be, because people might actually change their behavior once they drive a vehicle that has that technology on board. Of course, they may not even know they have that technology on board, and that's another issue as well. There have been quite a lot of studies that have shown that drivers don't actually know what functions they have available to them in many cases.
Yeah, that's good.
Oliver, there's another question in the question list from Helmut Schittenhelm. He says there are a lot of ways to measure driver behavior. Test drive, simulator experiments, FOT accidents, and so on.
Yes.
Where are the advantages and differences among them?
Okay, it's a very good question, but quite a complicated one. I wrote, if if you want afterwards, I could send a reference to a journal paper or even a couple of papers that I and some other people have written in this area. There was a special issue of Accident Analysis and Prevention on real-world studies. So I guess I'll try and segment that up. Why would we do a driving simulator study? Well, first of all, we might do a driving simulator study as part of the design stage of developing a function or a system. Then we can look systematically at different kinds of HMI. We can see how people behave when they get a visual message or an auditory message or a haptic message. We can look at issues like screen size, whatever. So it's a very good way of refining the design in the early development stage. Another reason for using a driving simulator is because we can create situations and we can make sure that all the people all the participants in our study have the same kind of experience. We can make them drive, all drive in fog if we're looking at a fog warning system or whatever. We can make them drive in fog and then encounter a queue of traffic very suddenly and so on. We can script situations, so we can't do that in the real world. So there are big advantages of control in a driving simulator. I guess the third big advantage is that we don't make people unsafe in a driving simulator. They may get sick from simulator sickness, from just the disturbance of their vestibular system, but they're not going to get long-term harm. So we can even have near crashes and quite severe events taking place, and we may have some people actually crash in a simulator. They may get shaken up by that in a kind of metaphorical way, in a psychological way, but they're not obviously going to have the rib injuries or whatever it is they might have in the real world. So those are some of the simulator advantages. The disadvantage of the simulator, or some disadvantages of simulator, I mean, we can have an endless debate about validity of driving simulators. We may get different behaviors in a driving simulator. We may get artifacts of a particular experiment because we're conducting in a simulator, so that people may tend to drive faster in a simulator than they do in the real world, or they may be thinking as they drive in the simulator that we're going to trick them in some way, so they actually might be a bit more cautious, etc., etc. The big difficulty with simulators is studying long-term behavior. We can't really look at months and months of driving in a driving simulator. It's just not physically possible. We can bring back people maybe 3, 4, 5 times. We might be able to get them to drive a few times in a day. But beyond that, it's not really feasible to look at learning effects. And we get that much more when we look at how people drive in the real world. And also, of course, the variety of situations we may not actually have in a driving simulator. So the acid test of a system tends to be a real-world trial. But of course, a real-world trial is much more expensive than a driving simulator experiment, so there are cost issues. And I think the final part, sorry this is quite a long answer, but it's a complicated issue, the final part was about accident studies. Yes, we can learn quite a lot from accident studies, but again, the advantage of real-world studies over accident studies is we know what happens prior to an event. And that's why we do these naturalistic driving studies or real-world trials, because we can see what's happening as the event, as the situation, as the incident unfolds. And in accident studies, the accident investigation team can only try and reconstruct the accident after the event. They can interview the participants, but they wouldn't normally know, for example, even for sure whether a driver was using their mobile phone just prior to the crash happening. They may or may not uncover that. It's not even that easy to know how fast people were driving before a crash, let alone what was happening around the vehicle in the traffic situation and so on. So accidents are very hard, sharp events. They're what we're trying to prevent in the end. In FOTs and in naturalistic driving studies, we tend to use accident surrogates. We tend to use, for example, if we're looking at rear-end events, we'd be using changes in people's time headway or changes in the number of very severe incidents they encounter. We're not very likely to have real-world crashes that we can count or reliably count in a real-world FOT or naturalistic driving study. Okay, that's my answer. I hope it's satisfactory.
I don't see any further questions being raised at this moment, so I think we reached the end of the seminar, the webinar.
Okay. Well, thank you to all the participants for your attention. I hope you benefited. As I said, you'll be able to, or as we said, you can get a recording of the webinar. You can get the slides shown in the webinar, and you have access to the FOT Handbook. And indeed, in my slides, there's also a link to my email, so you can contact me directly if you want to.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you all attendees, and hope to see you next time at the next webinar next week, the 19th of November. And it will be on performance indicators, as Oliver explained. Okay, thank you all.
Okay,
bye, everybody.
Okay, bye.
Bye.